Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube with a deeper look at one of the stories in the headlines. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway. And today we're joined by Jake Kwon, the BBC Seoul correspondent, to talk about one of the most dramatic nights in South Korean history when the then president declared martial law. And Jake, take us through what happened on the 3rd of December 2024 and what led up to it.
Well, just to set the scene, I think I was in my room just going through my email. This was around 10:30 p.m. here, and I started getting notifications on my phone, and my producer, the cameraman, he was messaging me as well to check my phone. It's never a good sign when that happens as a reporter, and it simply said President Yoon Suk Yeol had declared martial law. And I remember, turning on the television, watching this live broadcast of the president kind of declaring solemnly that anti-state forces have taken over the country. It is paralyzed, so he has no choice but to declare the martial law. Now, I think the first thing I had to do was to Google what is martial law. I mean, the last time South Korea had a martial law was more than 40 years ago. So it was before any of us, a lot, like including me, were born. And I think why President Yoon Suk Yeol had declared martial law, it's not enough to just look at what he declared that day. I think you have to kind of go back a little bit and set the scene for Yoon Suk Yeol. I mean, he was in trouble at this moment. He was very, very unpopular, and he just botched the last general election. So the parliament was stacked with his opposition. They had an absolute majority there. And he was unable to pass any of his bills. He wasn't able to advance his agenda. And what these big opposition in the parliament can do is they can start impeaching one of his judges, ministers, his prosecutors, his appointees. So his government really was becoming paralyzed, as he was saying, and he was truly a lame duck president. So he really was looking to change the tide here, and he really reached for the nuclear option. Now, this came as a surprise to all of us, including some member of his cabinet. Apparently, President Yoon only consulted with his defense minister before this thing happened, and his prime minister or any other ministers were only told minutes before he went on air to declare the martial law. So when I got to the scene at the National Assembly where the lawmakers were gathering, I think the general mood at the scene, I mean, there were hundreds of citizens who were out there, but the general mood really was that this can't be happening. There was this giant, great feeling of incredulity.
Yeah, it took people by surprise, but his political opponents, even some on his own side, and as you say, the public, responded pretty quickly to fight it.
Certainly. I think South Korean people, most of the people were simply shocked that this could happen. And despite the fact that it was at 10:30 p.m., I think a lot of people were watching this event. This really, you could immediately tell the electricity in there, knowing that this is a huge historic moment. And what happened was the opposition party, the Democratic Party of South Korea, they were sprung into action. A lot of these people were student activists who actively fought for the democracy back in the 80s, and they kind of already knew what had to be done. And they were, legal experts who knew that the South Korean law gives power to the parliament to vote down a martial law and lift this military rule. At the same time, things were starting to move very quickly. So I think people really had this feeling that there is a crisis here, that they need to do something about it. And later, thousands of South Korean citizens were on the street trying to block the soldiers. There were even armored vehicles in front of the National Parliament, and people were blocking it. People were blocking the window and getting on top of the vehicle, really. And even inside the National Assembly, the Parliament, the regular citizens have jumped the fences and helped the lawmakers who were trying to get there jump the fences themselves so they could fight the soldiers who were trying to get into the main chamber to stop the voting in order to really keep the martial law going. And while this is happening, as I was getting to the scene, I started getting these notifications from the now military general who really at this point has the power over the government, according to the Yoon's martial law, start giving out instructions saying that, now any kind of political assembly is banned. You cannot have political parties anymore. People must stop any kind of political activity. And I think the moment we realized we may be in a slippery slope to a dictatorship, authoritarianism, was when I started getting these notifications that these texts and statement that were being sent out by the military command saying that there can be no more political parties or political gatherings. There will be censorship of the media reports. It truly felt unreal that this was happening. And I think there was a famous moment where the current president, Lee Jae-myung, at the time the opposition leader, he was live streaming himself and calling on all the citizens to gather at the National Assembly to help their cause and help and make sure that the lawmakers can all gather and vote down this martial law.
So at this moment, you've got people on the streets of Seoul facing off against the military. How did it end, this standoff?
Well, there were special forces members, fully armed, walking around and getting into the main chamber. And there were for several hours, it really didn't know which way the history was going to go. Now, we have been seeing these updates of more and more lawmakers gathering. There was a quorum that was required. And then when that number was reached, they voted it down. Now, that happened around 4 hours after the martial law was originally declared. And now the question was whether the military was going to comply. I mean, it really can come down to who has the power. Now, we later learned that the military was giving a very passive compliance. The soldiers who were in the National Assembly, they were carrying guns, but those were not loaded. Now, we did not know this at the time. And some of the brave, congressional aides were actually physically pushing off and barricading the doors and barricading the hallway to keep these fully armed soldiers out of the chamber. So there was a lot of bravery happening. And we were all kind of waiting to see if President Yoon Suk Yeol was going to back down. And for a moment, it really looked like we weren't sure if he would back down, because if he did back down, it would be a certain death, not only as a political actor, but if he was going to be impeached and prosecuted for insurrection. That charge carries the minimum penalty of life in prison and the maximum penalty of death sentence. So it really was a gamble that he could not back down from. But after a few hours, we heard that the military was pulling out of the National Assembly. And I remember this moment when a big cheer just went up amongst thousands of people who were gathered there. And people were screaming, "We have won, we have won." And there was really this feeling of euphoria that swept over the plaza.
And so Yoon Suk Yeol backs down. What happens as the morning unfolds and in the days ahead?
Well, the next step was, of course, impeachment of Yoon Suk Yeol. He was now on back foot. It was very obvious that his opponents were not going to hold back anything. It almost seemed certain that there was enough lawmakers that would push for his impeachment, but there were still holdouts in his own ruling party. I think a lot of South Korean public had gave off a sigh of relief when he was impeached. And again, of course, he resisted the next arrest warrant for a bit, and there was a standoff. But after a couple tries, he finally gave himself up, and he was sent to prison. And soon, of course, an insurrection trial followed, including a corruption trial, and now he's facing 5 different trials.
So he's on trial. Who is running South Korea now?
Well, after the impeachment of Yoon Suk Yeol, of course, there were a series of caretaker presidents. And then in June, we finally had a new election. In this election, of course, the very front runner, Lee Jae-myung, had won the election in a landslide, though not as big of a win that a lot of people have expected or had hoped. His opponent still won about 40% of the votes. And although any other circumstances, this would have been a big win for Mr. Lee, I think a lot of people were very much concerned that a candidate who did not fully divorce himself from the ousted, Mr. Yoon, was able to accrue so many votes.
And have the divisions that have continued in South Korea, have they been on display as people mark the 1-year anniversary?
Certainly. I mean, today we saw this this large protest happening in front of the National Assembly, and the bigger one of the two was calling for less leniency, a more thorough punishment of those who organized the martial law and who still adhere to the former President Yoon Suk Yeol. And there was a counter-protest, a much smaller one. The group of people who perhaps do not support the impeachment of President Yoon or his prosecution. And there are some of them who even justify and believes that the martial law was entirely correct to do. Now, this is a problem for President Lee Jae-myung. He was talking to the foreign reporters today, this morning, and I was there, and he was talking about national unity and reconciliation. But he is facing about a quarter of the Korean population, according to the latest polls, who do not believe that President Yoon had committed an insurrection, and that about 10 to 15% of the South Korean public who believes that Mr. Yoon's insurrection or the martial law attempt was entirely justified. So the question for him is, what is he going to do about these people, and how is he going to really reconcile when the gap seems so large? And he said he has the two solutions. One, he really needs to tackle the what he calls the coup d'etat forces, the insurrection organizers, and he said that they need to be punished, as the Nazi Germany has gotten after the war. Some really strong words there. And he also said that the reason a lot of people seem to adhere to this pro-Yoon ideology seems to be because of misinformation or disinformation. So he said he will criminalize fake news in order to cut down on their influence.
Now, before that declaration of martial law a year ago, South Korea was seen as a thriving democracy, but it has a history with dictatorships in the 60s, 70s and 80s. What's been the legacy of that declaration of martial law going forward?
I think a lot of South Koreans are very proud of the democratization of South Korea, which happened in 1987. A lot of people who are alive around remember joining in this June, what is sometimes called a June Revolution, a June Rebellion, that brought about South Korea's democracy. And if you think about it, out of the Asia, there are very few countries who have a full democracy and thriving one like South Korea. And if you go out on the streets of Korea, of Seoul, you'll see a protest on every corner because everyone feels quite comfortable voicing their political opinion here. Now, when that felt threatened, I think a lot of the legacy of the dictatorship era is that a lot of people here remember fighting for that democracy and upholding that value. And there was a reason very few people actually supported the martial law, at least on that day. And thousands of people gathered even though it was around midnight, and the lawmakers did not think twice before coming to the National Assembly and very bravely fought for it. Now, of course, now the current President Lee Jae-myung, he's saying that the real challenge here is to keep the South Korea's democracy safe. And in order to do that, he really needs to pass on this legacy, this memory. And this is why he said that he will designate today, the December 3rd, as a national holiday. So every year it can be commemorated, and next generation and the next can always remember this day as the day South Korean people had fought to keep the democracy in South Korea.
Jake Kwon, our Seoul correspondent, thank you. If you want more international stories, check out the Global News Podcast wherever you get your BBC podcasts. If you like this episode, then like and subscribe below. And if there's anything you want us to cover, put a message in the comments. But that's it for now from the Global News Podcast on YouTube.